What kind of father sells his own daughters to strangers in a dusty saloon? Nora Blackwood asked herself that question as she stood on a wooden crate with her younger sister's trembling hand locked in hers. The air inside the saloon was hot and heavy, filled with cigar smoke and the smell of whiskey spilled across warped floorboards. Men crowded around them with greedy eyes, waiting for the next bid. Nora could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as her father lifted the gavel again, drunk and angry at the world. Wyoming Territory in 1876 was a wild place, a place where men chased gold, cattle, and anything else they could claim as their own. But Nora never imagined her father would try to claim her and Nellie as property to sell. Nora was 22, old enough to know the dangers of men like the ones watching her now. Nellie was 18, soft-spoken, sweet-hearted, and far too young to understand the full horror of what was happening. "Sold for $50, Jeremiah Blackwood shouted, slamming the gavel down with a sickening crack. His words slurred together from too much whiskey. His eyes were bloodshot and careless as the crowd murmured with approval. Nellie let out a terrified gasp, trying to pull away when a heavy-set miner stepped forward to claim her. "You can't do this!" Nora shouted, her voice shaking as she grabbed her sister's arm. "We are your daughters, not animals to be sold." Jeremiah's face twisted with irritation. "Your ma died and left me with 2 mouths to feed. This is payment for all the trouble you caused." Nellie cried out as the miner's rough hands closed around her arm. "Let me go! Nora! Please!" Nora lunged toward them, but her father grabbed her by the back of the dress and yanked her down. Pain shot through her shoulder as she struggled, kicking at the dusty floor. The room erupted with laughter from a few drunken onlookers who found entertainment in her fear. Then, everything stopped. The saloon doors slammed open with a force that silenced the crowd. Dust floated in the bright rays of sunlight pouring through the doorway as 2 tall figures stepped inside. They moved with purpose, boots thudding against the wooden floor as every man in the room turned to look. "I believe there's been a mistake," a deep voice announced. The taller cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair and sharp blue eyes that cut across the room. His partner, broader in the shoulders and equally intimidating, placed a hand near the revolver at his hip. Jeremiah scowled, gripping the gavel like a weapon. "This is a private sale. State your business." The taller cowboy's gaze drifted to Nora, then Nellie, and something flashed behind his eyes, a mix of anger and disbelief. "My name is Matthew Caldwell," he said calmly, "Territorial Deputy Marshal. This is my brother, Miles, and I'm afraid this auction ends now." Gasps rippled through the saloon as Matthew shifted his coat just enough to reveal the shine of a badge pinned to his vest. The miner holding Nellie froze. Even the drunkest men in the room knew better than to challenge a marshal. Miles stepped forward, voice low and steady. "Let the girl go. Now." Quote. The miner hesitated for one breath, then another, then quickly released Nellie as if her skin burned him. Nellie ran straight into Nora's arms, shaking violently as Nora wrapped both arms around her. Jeremiah's face turned red with fury. "These girls are mine. I'll do with them what I please." Matthew stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "Not anymore. Anyone still hoping to buy them can collect their money and leave. Anyone who disagrees can take it up with the territorial law." The room erupted into frantic movement. No man in the saloon wanted trouble with the deputy marshal. They backed away, muttering curses but returning the money Jeremiah had taken. Chairs scraped. Boots shuffled. Within seconds, the crowd scattered. Only Jeremiah remained, clutching the gavel and shaking with rage. "You think you can take them from me?" he barked. "They're my blood." Matthew stood between Jeremiah and the girls. "Your right to them ended the moment you tried to sell them." He stepped forward. "You have 1 minute to get out before I arrest you." Quote. Jeremiah's jaw clenched. Hatred burned in his eyes as he grabbed the pile of bills from the table. "Ungrateful girls," he hissed, spitting on the floor. "Don't come crying back when these men show you who they really are." He shoved past the swinging doors and disappeared into the sunlight. Silence settled over the room. Nora held Nellie tightly, both of them breathing hard. She looked up just as Matthew turned to face them, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Nora struggled to speak. Her voice came out small, almost broken. I don't know. Miles approached with 2 glasses of water. Drink this. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. But as Nora looked at the 2 cowboys, 2 strangers who had stopped a nightmare, something inside her shifted. For the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest spark of hope. Do you have anywhere to go? Matthew asked. Nora shook her head. No, but we'll manage. We always have. Matthew and Miles exchanged a silent look before Matthew said, You don't have to, not alone. Our ranch is 10 miles out. You can stay there and work for fair wages until you decide what's next. Nora hesitated, torn between fear and the desperate need for safety. Nellie whispered, Please, Nora, I don't want to be alone again. Nora took a steady breath and met Matthew's eyes. We accept, for now. The brothers nodded. And as they stepped into the sunlight outside the saloon, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just changed forever. Nora expected the 10-mile ride to the Caldwell Ranch to feel like a long, uncomfortable journey, but instead it felt like crossing from one life into another. The wagon rattled over the dirt road, the sun warming their backs as Matthew drove, and Miles kept watch beside him. Nellie sat close to Nora, her head resting on her shoulder, still shaken from what had almost happened. Nora tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled every time she replayed the scene in the saloon. Her father's voice, the men's laughter, Nellie's screams. She squeezed her sister's hand gently. You're safe now, she whispered. I know, Nellie said softly, because of them. Nora looked toward the front of the wagon. Matthew sat tall, focused on the road, his jaw set in a way that made her wonder what he was thinking. Miles noticed her watching and gave a small, reassuring nod. It surprised her how much comfort that small gesture gave. When they finally reached the ranch, the sight took Nora's breath away. The land stretched out wide and peaceful, a mix of green pasture and rolling hills. A solid 2-story log house stood at the center, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Cattle grazed in distant fields. Horses lifted their heads at the sound of the wagon, ears twitching in curiosity. It's beautiful, Nellie whispered. Matthew helped them down, his movements gentle as if afraid they might break. Welcome to Caldwell Ranch, he said. You're safe here. The front door opened and a warm-looking older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Abernathy, Miles called. We brought guests. Her eyes widened when she saw Nora and Nellie's torn dresses and shaken faces. But instead of questions, she simply said, Poor things, come inside. You look hungry and tired. For the first time in a long while, someone spoke to Nora with kindness. Inside, the house smelled of stew and fresh bread. The wood floors were clean. The air felt warm and safe. Mrs. Abernathy led them upstairs to a tidy bedroom with 2 small beds. You'll share this room, she said kindly. Wash what you can, rest when you need, and come down when you're ready to eat. As soon as she left, Nellie collapsed onto the bed and cried. Not loud sobs, just soft, shaking tears she had clearly been holding in. Nora knelt beside her and ran her fingers through her sister's hair. It's over, Nora whispered. He can't hurt us now. But after everything they had been through, part of Nora still feared that safety could disappear at any moment. At dinner, the brothers sat across from the sisters while Mrs. Abernathy served steaming bowls of stew. The room was quiet at first, the weight of the day still heavy. After a few minutes, Nellie gathered the courage to speak. Thank you, she said shyly, for saving us. Miles shifted awkwardly. Anyone with a conscience would have done the same. Matthew shook his head. Not everyone would have stepped in, but we couldn't ignore what we saw. Nora set her spoon down. Why did you? You didn't know us. Matthew hesitated before speaking. His voice was lower now, quieter. We lost someone once, someone young, someone we loved. And we swore we would never again stand by while the innocent suffered. Nora felt the meaning behind his words. Loss had shaped him. Pain had carved something deep inside him, but instead of bitterness, it had turned into strength. After dinner, Nora helped Mrs. Abernathy with dishes, while Nellie sat at the table sipping tea. Matthew and Miles spoke quietly near the door, voices low but serious. Nora couldn't make out the words, but she could see the tension in Matthew's shoulders. Later, Mrs. Abernathy showed Nora the sewing room, a small, bright space with windows that looked out over the garden. A sewing machine sat on a sturdy table. It was Matthew's mother's. Mrs. Abernathy explained, "He wanted you to have use of it." Nora touched the machine carefully. "This is too much." "He doesn't see it that way," the housekeeper said gently. "Good men show their hearts more in actions than words." That night, Nora lay awake, listening to the quiet creaks of the house. Nellie slept soundly beside her, finally unafraid. But Nora's mind would not rest. Why had Matthew looked at her that way earlier? Why did she feel something pull inside her chest every time he spoke? She tried to push the thoughts away. Their stay was temporary. They had no right to dream of things they couldn't have. The next morning, the ranch came alive with activity. Cattle lowed in the distance. Horses snorted in the yard. Mrs. Abernathy cooked breakfast while the brothers prepared for the day. Nellie joined Miles outside to see the horses, and Nora went to the sewing room. She began mending torn shirts, stitching carefully and neatly. She found comfort in the work, her hands moving with purpose. In the stable, Nellie surprised everyone. A nervous chestnut mare named Firefly paced restlessly in her stall whenever someone approached. Ranch hands claimed she was too wild to ever trust people again. But when Nellie stepped forward, something changed. She spoke softly, moving slowly, letting the horse sniff her hand. Firefly's ears twitched. Her pacing slowed. She leaned gently toward Nellie, accepting her touch. Miles stared in disbelief. "I'll be damned," then he quickly added, "Pardon my language, Miss Nellie." Matthew appeared at the stable door. His eyes widened as Firefly rested her muzzle against Nellie's shoulder. "She's never taken to anyone," he said. Nellie smiled proudly. "Animals just need patience." Matthew glanced at Nora, who stood nearby watching. "Your sister has a gift," he said. Nora nodded. "She does." Then his eyes met hers, holding her still. "And so do you. You give people a reason to breathe easier. That's a rare thing." Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say. But before she could answer, a rider galloped into the yard, dust rising behind him. He dismounted fast and rushed toward Matthew. "Marshal Caldwell," he said, out of breath. "There's trouble in Sweetwater. 2 girls missing. Their parents think they were taken." Matthew's face hardened. Miles cursed under his breath. Nora felt fear twist inside her. Matthew turned to his brother. "Saddle up. We leave in 10 minutes." He started toward the house, then paused and looked back at Nora. "I promise you," he said quietly, "no one will ever hurt you or Nellie again." Something in his voice made her believe him, even though she didn't know what was coming next. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The next morning felt heavy with worry. Nora stood near the porch as Matthew tightened the saddle strap on his horse, preparing for the ride to Sweetwater. He looked pale, as if sleep had avoided him all night. Miles stood beside him, checking his rifle and adjusting the straps on the pack horse that would carry supplies. Nellie held Nora's arm, her fingers still trembling. "Will he be all right?" she whispered. Nora didn't know. Matthew wasn't riding into a simple chore. He was heading toward danger, toward the kind of men who had taken those 2 missing girls, men who bought and sold human lives as easily as cattle. Matthew stepped toward the sisters. "You'll stay close to the house," he instructed. "Help Mrs. Abernathy. Don't wander off without Miles or one of the ranch hands." Nora nodded, but her heart pounded. "We'll be careful." He hesitated, his eyes locking on hers with something deep and unspoken behind them. "Good." Then he mounted his horse, pulled the reins tight, and with a final look rode off with Miles towards Sweetwater. The following 2 days passed slowly. Nora tried to stay busy. She sewed shirts for the ranch hands and patched riding pants. Nellie tended to Firefly, who was growing more trusting by the day. Mrs. Abernathy kept them busy with chores to distract their minds. But every night Nora stood by the window, staring at the moonlit pastures, praying Matthew was safe. On the morning of the 3rd day, a distant horse galloped toward the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Nellie ran to the porch. Nora followed, fear building in her chest. The rider was a stranger, dust-covered and breathless. He slid off his horse and hurried forward. "Is this Caldwell Ranch?" he asked. Miles didn't ride in beside him. Nora felt her legs weaken. "Yes," Mrs. Abernathy said. "What's happened?" The rider removed his hat, his face serious. "I'm Jameson, from the marshal's office in Sweetwater. Your marshal's been injured." Nora felt her heart stop. The air rushed out of her lungs. "He's alive," Jameson added quickly. "But he's hurt bad. He told me to fetch Miles." "Miles wasn't here." Nora took a shaky step forward. "What happened to him?" Jameson looked at her, recognizing her from descriptions. "Ambush. Harrison's men opened fire while he was on his way back from questioning a family. Took a bullet to the shoulder and another along his ribs. Doc Jenkins is tending to him now." Nora didn't wait for permission. "I'm going with you." Mrs. Abernathy gasped. "Nora, it's dangerous." "I don't care," Nora said through tears. "I'm not sitting here waiting to hear if he lives or dies." Jameson hesitated, then nodded. "If you're coming, we ride now." Nellie grabbed Nora's hand. "Be careful, please." Nora hugged her tightly. "I'll come back, I promise." The ride to Sweetwater was rough and fast. Nora clung to the saddle, her legs aching from the pace. Dust stung her eyes, and fear pushed her faster. She barely noticed the hills passing or the sun dipping low. She only thought of Matthew. When they arrived, Jameson led her straight to the doctor's office. Nora rushed inside, breathless and shaking. Matthew lay on a narrow bed, sweat beading on his forehead, his shirt cut open, white bandages wrapped around his shoulder and ribs. His face was pale, his jaw clenched in pain. When he saw her, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Nora," he whispered. She hurried to his bedside, tears blurring her vision. "I'm here." "You shouldn't have come," he said weakly. "And you shouldn't have been shot," she countered gently, her voice breaking. "But here we are." He tried to smile, but winced. "Fair point." Jameson stepped forward. He saved 2 girls, found them locked in a wagon behind a barn. Harrison's men didn't like that. Nora felt fresh tears sting her eyes. "You could have been killed." Matthew reached for her hand, his fingers warm but trembling. "I thought about you. That kept me fighting." Her heart cracked open. She didn't care who saw. She leaned closer, brushing her hand across his cheek. "You scared me," she whispered. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I don't ever want to scare you." For a long moment they just held each other's gaze. Matthew's breathing steadied. Nora rested her forehead gently against his. "Stay," he murmured. "Please." "I'm not leaving," she promised. The next morning, Matthew was strong enough to travel, but only with help. Nora rode beside the wagon that carried him back to the ranch. Miles arrived halfway home. Having returned from town early, he rode next to them, relief softening his gruff expression. At the ranch, the hands gathered around to help lift Matthew inside. Nellie hugged Nora tightly, crying with relief. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over everyone, scolding Matthew for being reckless even as she dabbed his forehead with a cool cloth. Days passed. Matthew healed slowly, stubbornly, refusing to rest as much as he needed. Nora stayed by his side, bringing him water, tending to his wounds, and reading to him in the evenings. He tried to apologize once more for scaring her, but she pressed a finger to his lips. "You came back," she said softly. "That's all that matters." One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Matthew took her hand. "I want to tell you something," he said. Nora sat beside him. "What is it?" Quote. His thumb brushed her knuckles gently. "When I saw you standing in that saloon, frightened but refusing to break, something inside me changed." His voice softened. "I've tried to push it away. I told myself it was too fast. That you deserve someone whole, someone unbroken." Quote. "Matthew. But every time you walk into a room, I breathe easier," he continued. "Every time you look at me, I want to be a better man. And when I was lying there, bleeding in Sweetwater, all I could think was, I can't leave this world without telling you the truth." Nora swallowed, her heart thundering. "What truth?" she whispered. He held her hand tighter. "I love you, Nora." The words hit her like a warm wave washing over cold stone. She leaned closer, her forehead touching his. "I love you too," she said through tears. "I think I have, since the moment you made that saloon go quiet." Matthew let out a shaky breath, relief softening his entire body. He cupped her cheek with his good hand, drew her close, and kissed her softly. A gentle, grateful kiss. A promise. From that day forward, things changed. Matthew recovered fully. Nora and Nellie became a permanent part of the ranch. Nellie trained horses and healed animals. Nora sewed for the family and helped Mrs. Abernathy. The hands respected them. The ranch felt warmer, fuller, livelier. Matthew courted Nora with simple, heartfelt gestures. Wildflowers, quiet walks, soft smiles. Months later, he proposed under the cottonwood tree at sunset. And Nora said yes with tears in her eyes and joy in her heart. The sisters who had been sold as property now owned their own future. The men who had once been strangers became their protectors, partners, and family. And love, steady, strong, and fearless, became the life Nora had never dared dream she deserved.